So hey everyone, Hashi here, or also known online as Action Movie Dad. I am a senior content creator for Red Giant, and now that Red Giant and Maxon are fused, I'm excited to see what other developments will do in the future. Here is some of the fun, exciting stuff that I like to do with After Effects. Lots of crazy compositing, sometimes throwing in monsters, robots, and just all sorts of fun things, mostly as part of this tutorial series I teach there called Cheap Tricks. Hopefully some of you have heard of it. If you haven't, it's a great way to dive into After Effects and do some really crazy VFX shots. Now, unfortunately, I can't be there in person with all of you like I would have loved to do this, so we're still going to attempt to do a VFX shot live. And I thought, what better way than to try to reimagine this scenario by imagining that the reason we couldn't be together today was not because of a horrible pandemic, but perhaps because there was a giant monster attacking Las Vegas, not allowing us to make it to the convention center. There we go. Just one quick sound effect tweak, and yeah, there we go. Awesome. So, now we're going to kind of rush through it, but my goal here today is to teach you how to do one of these exciting movie moments in sort of this handheld camera style. All right, so let's get started. I'm inside After Effects. I'm going to grab my piece of street footage and drag it down here to make it its own comp. And the very first step of any of these projects, because they are a moving, handheld kind of looking footage, is to camera track them. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and track our camera and let that run in the background. Now, because I value your time and your friendship even more, we're going to jump ahead to where that camera track has completed. And as we scrub through, it looks like with this nice static kind of footage, we got a great camera track on this. So the very first thing we've got to do is establish where our world is going to be located. I'll try to find a spot where I can see a few tracking points on the ground, like this one way back here, and maybe these two in the foreground. That'll triangulate a nice plane right here, which I can right-click and say Set Ground Plane and Origin. And I can right-click again and say Create Solid and Camera. So that's created our first guide solid for this world, which is kind of right under this bridge, as you can see. So that's very nice. I also know that we want to throw the police car right into kind of this area over here. And we got a lot of great planes defined along this. So I can kind of grab or even lasso a group of these and go ahead and create another solid here, which will be a guide point for where we smash our car later. And there are a couple objects in the scene that would occlude where this monster is going to be. So I'd like to make sure that I'm creating a few guides for myself there to save myself some time. So let's look at this bridge. This is a big one that's going to be right in front of our monster. So let me scroll to a spot where I feel like I get a good idea of where this bridge is. Maybe right here I can grab this spot, that spot, and maybe over here somewhere. Whenever you triangulate, it's good to try to grab a good sample frame that really has points spread out across the object you're trying to track. Luckily, this is a flat kind of object, so we'll just create another solid right here. And as I scroll through that footage, it looks like it's pretty married to that bridge. And now let me hide that for a moment, and we'll create some guides on this. These street lights are kind of going to be in front of the monster at some point too. So let's say we'll create, grab a few points from these street lights and try to get a plane going right across them, maybe all the way over to here. Great. Okay, create a solid. Excellent. I'm going to rename a couple of these. Let's call these the traffic lights. Let's call this one the bridge. This one was our sign where the police car goes, and this one's the ground. Now let's quickly scrub through and see if there are any other spots that might be helpful for us to have some 3D guides on. It feels like this whole area with this little fence in front of this might be a useful bit of data to have. So there aren't really any tracking points on it, but there are on these, let's see, maybe these little street sign things ahead of it. So let me grab some points from there, some points from there, and the bottom of these signs all together to create a little solid right here. Now, this solid is kind of wackadoo. I'm going to quickly rotate it around its center point and see where it looks like it is in space. Okay, so it's kind of wonky, but I might be able to use this to roto out this foreground fence a little bit later if I want. I'm going to use the gizmos to kind of translate that in X and Y and see where that ends up. And now that I have all of the 3D guides I think I will need to successfully pull off this comp, I'm going to do a process that I call normalizing the camera. Sometimes when you camera track a scene, you have no idea what you're going to get in terms of the scale of your After Effects world. And that can be really problematic, especially if you're always having to bring in solids and scale them up dramatically. You're bringing in stock footage and having to shrink it down to like 1% or something. So this process helps with all that, and I call it normalizing your 3D scene. So the way that works is it's all based on this ground plane. Now the ground plane, I'll solo for a moment, is right here. It's a little bit under this bridge, which is fine, but it's kind of aligned in its own axis. So what it's important to do is to use the gizmos only to translate it for a moment. I'm going to rotate this so Z is pointed straight up into the air relative to the comp. That Y arrow looks like it's pointed straight down the axis of the streets, and the X axis looks like it's kind of going horizontally across our scene like this. Now that feels a little bit more natural. And in fact, because this is our ground plane, I'm going to take this solid and move it back in space just a little bit using the Y gizmo. Really important to use the gizmos only to move these for now. So I'm going to take this in Y and translate it back. I'm going to hold down Shift to move it to kind of here. This is where I think the monster will actually be standing. Back here somewhere. I'm going to move this down to the bottom here, and then I'm going to parent all of my other 3D references to it, including the camera. Now, once I've done this, I can go to my ground plane and click P for position, and I'm going to reset this position to be 960 by 540, 540 by 0. Now, the important thing about that is it's exactly the middle point of an HD comp. Now, if you are ever working with an HD comp from scratch, whenever you bring in something, you'll notice that that's the position. That's why I moved it there. Now, we're also going to go to the rotation. And if you were to lay down a card flat in After Effects, it ends up at 270 by 0 by 0. So I'm going to change this orientation to 270 by 0 by 0. And now I'm going to create a new solid that I'll just call dummy for now. And we'll turn this into a 3D solid, but we're not going to parent it to anything. Now you'll see right when I brought this in, it put itself right in the middle of that ground plane, which is exactly what I want. So as I scroll through, I can now see that a piece of HD footage would sit perfectly right here if I were to bring in something by default. Now I'm going to go to the ground plane and open up the scale properties. And if I slide the scale down in this case, I can make it so this HD piece of footage would approximately fill screen when I'm, getting relatively closer to it. That way all of my stock elements and things will probably be scaled about like this. Let's just say that this is a 50%. Great. Now I can delete the dummy because I don't need it anymore, and I can go ahead and unparent everything from the ground plane if I want. It doesn't matter that it's parented anymore. Now let's go ahead and use some of those guide solids as a way to mat out some of these foreground objects. Let's scroll to right around the middle here, and I'm going to turn back on my bridge 3D guide, which is this one. Let's turn down its opacity a bit, and we'll scale it up to kind of bridge this bridge. All right, let's see here. I'm going to move it using the gizmo over this way a little bit, maybe scale it a little bit wider like that. And then I can draw a few really simple masks on it. Let's start with just the obvious bulk of it right here. Great. I'll move it like that, add a mask point, scrub forward a little bit, and pretty good. It's holding to that bridge pretty well. I'll move some of these mask points a little bit. Great, great. And the bottom of this bridge is right around here. Maybe we'll feather this mask. I'll press F and add like 3 pixels of feathering to it, maybe just 2. Turn on some motion blur because there's probably a little bit of that. All right, great. We've got this bridge matted out for the most part. I can refer to that mask anytime I need to reveal something that was back here, which is great. Turn that off for a moment. Let's look at our traffic light situation here. We'll scale this up as well to kind of cover this whole area that we might need to matte out. Turn its opacity down for just a second using the T button. And now what's really great about these animated masks, or rather these 3D solids, is that I can just go through and draw roughly the shape of this street light arm. There we go. It's so fun to watch people draw masks in live streams, right? And now you see that these two guide solids can work in concert to basically block out this foreground from any CG monster we put back here. So in fact, I'm going to turn these guys up to 100% opacity, and I can even pre-comp these now. So let's pre-comp and just call this foreground street matte. All right, so we'll do that, and we'll press the collapse transformations button to make it kind of come back to life here. And now if I bring in a copy of my original footage, I could press F4 to show the modes and switch that to an alpha matte for the original piece of footage. All right, so let's just preview what this nicely rotoed bridge and foreground items look like. And that's pretty great. It's a little sloppy here and there, but we're working quick, so not too bad, everyone. All right, let's unsolo this and reveal everything. All right, so we got a nice setup here, but we're obviously missing a monster right here. Now, a 3D animated monster seems like a really intimidating task, but I'm going to try to break it down here. Now, I'm not personally an animator. I am an After Effects artist. I'm very comfortable in there and get a little bit uncomfortable once I have to go outside and work with real 3D programs and the like. However, some people have made some amazing plugins and tools that help me work back and forth between some online resources, Cinema 4D, and After Effects to create animated characters right inside my comp window where I'm comfortable doing it. So let's get started with that. Now, if you are familiar with any of my Cheap Tricks episodes on redgiant.com, you would know that my not-so-secret weapon for something like this is Mixamo.com. Now, Mixamo is this amazing Adobe-hosted project, which is all about being able to browse through different types of 3D characters, like these beautiful guys right here. They've got a pretty awesome selection, and pairing them with this animation library they have. This library of motions and motion capture is pretty extensive, and I found it really useful for doing things even with VFX. So, over here in the Characters tab, I can browse through a bunch of the characters that exist in their library, and they're nice and diverse. But what's really cool about Mixamo is that you can bring in any T-posed human anthropomorph and automatically rig them using a really cool system within the site. I highly suggest it. For today, for time, we're just going to browse through and see if any of these characters inspire us for this particular thing. Let's go over to the second page here. There was one that I saw the other day that I thought could be kind of fun. And, oh, let's see here. That'd be this character, Jones. I just really like the design of this character. Pretty awesome. All right, so let's add some animation to Jones here. All right, under animations, I can maybe search for some keywords like, let's try scary. Oh, and right in here we got this like scary clown walk. That's kind of cool. And I like this. Maybe that'll be a good entrance for this character. Ooh, this scary clown stopping. There you go. It's a perfect monster movie entrance. I love it. One of the cool things about Mixamo is that it has all these little options like arm height, walk speed, overdrive. There are a lot of these types of things available for different animations here. The main one that I'm concerned with is this overdrive one. It's effectively the speed. So if I were to turn this up, he'd do this super fast. And if I were to crank it down below 50, we get kind of this slower thing. What's nice about that is it feels a lot more like a movie monster, tromping around. Now, I'm imagining this guy to be about, 50 to 100 feet, somewhere in that range. So I'm going to maybe make him about this big. He's got to be big enough to pick up a police car. So that feels like a good speed to me. Boom, he stops right there. Let's take the arm height and maybe have it be a little lower. Yeah, that looks great. So now what's great is I can just click download this thing, where it's going to save this model as an animated FBX with all of its textures and everything. Now, so this whole thing is a little bit more exciting. I'd really like for Jones here to do something a little bit more interesting than just walk into place. I'd love him to pick up and throw something. So I'm going to look up throw. And we've got a variety of different throw animations that I can click and put right on him, which is great. Now, right here is this one called throw object, where the character leans down, picks up something, and then throws it. Now that is pretty awesome. Now let's look at this again and look at some of these controls that I'd mentioned earlier. Now I'll turn down the overdrive maybe to 33% speed. Maybe a little bit slower, just to make this monster sized. Lean down, pick up something, and toss it. That'll work well for our police car, I think. Let me check if a mirrored version of this action looks any better. I think this might look more dynamic from this car that's kind of driving up toward this character, like that. So I like this. All right, so let's download this version, and we'll save it in here as the throw object. Save. And thank you, Mixamo. All right, so now I'm going to head over to my 3D partner in crime, Cinema 4D. Now, we'll start off really simply by opening up our first animation we downloaded, that scary clown stopping animation. I'll say OK, that'll think for a second, and when it opens up, we have this awesome animated walk-in, just like we had over at Mixamo.com. It comes in as this geometry file of the monster and his skeleton animation right there, which is great. So we've got this one, but we downloaded two. So right over here in the browser, let's say File, Merge Objects, and bring in our throw animation. We'll say OK to that as well. And I do not want to reassign included takes. I just want him to come in as well. And now it looks like we have two animated characters right here. This one walking forward, this one leaning down, picking up stuff and throwing it, which is pretty cool. That's sort of what we should have expected. But what I really want for my After Effects composition is to combine these two together. So let's go ahead and save this as its own Cinema 4D project. We'll call this Combined. All right, now we're going to use some cool techniques to combine these two animations together. Now we've got these two pairs of things, geometries and skeletons. We're going to group these with a little Alt-G on these two, select these two, Alt-G here. We'll call this one the walk-in. We'll call this one the throw. Great, so we've got our two animations here. And now we're going to add a motion clip to each of these two groups. We do that by selecting the group and then going to Animate, Add Motion Clip. Now let's just call this what it is, the walk-in. You'll see this little cool icon appeared right there. Then we'll select our second group again, and we'll say Animate, Add Motion Clip. And you'll see the little icon appears there. Now I'm going to be copying over animation from this group, so I don't need to see it anymore. I'm going to double-click here to hide that whole group. And now I'm going to click on the walk-in group, highlight its motion clip icon right there, and then say Open in Timeline. And you'll see what that did is it's showing me this cool interface where I have the character and his animation as one simplified block right here, like that. Now, if I were to add some frames to this animation, let's say make this like 350 or something long, and expand that a bit. Now we have a little bit of space to play. So you'll see down here I've got the walk-in animation, and that's about this long, but we also have this throw animation. And if I click and drag that onto the timeline over here, Now I have this whole secondary animation that's going to be applied to the original geometry. So if I play through this, you see he's walking in here, and then a moment later he's going to bend down and pick up something and throw it. Now this is all good and well, but this is kind of disjointed. We've got this kind of weird frozen in place, and then he snaps into place there. But what's really awesome about motion clips is watch this. I can take this whole second one, drag it over like this, and they can start to overlap. I can overlap these together. So if I want, you'll see right here this cool transition curve between one pose and the next. And what that looks like in motion is really great. He's going to walk into place here, and then right around here, there's going to be a transition from this pose into the leaning down to pick up the car pose. Now, obviously, their stance is a little bit different at the end, and so there's some foot sliding right here. So maybe I can slide this a little bit further to give a little bit more overlap between the two animations. Let's see what that does. There's a little bit of sliding, but for a pretty quick job on two kind of different looking animations, this is great. We have scary character walking in, and then he leans down to pick up something at his feet and toss it into the wall. Great. And now we need to figure out a way to get them into After Effects. Now, like I said earlier, I love After Effects. I'm very comfortable in there. I am not very comfortable rendering in Cinema 4D yet. So the best way that I know how to get control back in my own hands in After Effects is using Video Copilot's Element 3D. Now, Element has this awesome ability to utilize Cinema 4D sequences. So what I'm going to do next is convert this animated Cinema 4D file into a series of Cinema 4D poses of this whole walk-in. And to do that, I'm going to use this awesome extension that we found on AE Scripts called the File Sequence Exporter. And this exporter really couldn't be simpler. You basically just select an object like this, and then from the exporter, let's see, how far does this animation go? It stops around frame 260. So I'm going to say between there and 260, let's export this monster as a sequence of Cinema 4D files. Perfect, perfect, great. Let's use the active objects only and say export. It's going to think through that really quickly. Quick enough that we can actually probably jump back over to After Effects and start setting up for their arrival. So back in After Effects, we've got the ground right here, which is great for our origin. And I'm going to add a new solid called Element Monster. All right, so that's going to be right behind our bridge, just like that. Let's add in Element. I'm actually using another tool by Video Copilot called the FX Console to bring up effects like that. Now let's see. We'll go to Element, then the Scene Setup. And here we have the interface for Element 3D. If you've never used it for some reason, it is this standalone little interface that allows you to bring in 3D objects, which will then be rendered into After Effects. I'm going to say File, Import 3D Sequence. And it looks like our monster sequence is done exporting all the way through frame 260. So I'll just select the very first frame. It's set as a sequence right now, and I'll just say open. And we'll load in the materials and all of this stuff. Great. I'll say OK. And boom, we've got our character. He's come into here, and if I click on this browser right here on that model monster, I can scrub through the frames that came in. It looks like it says 261 frames, just like that. If I scroll forward, perfect. We've got his animation loading in right within Element. Now, Element uses an image-based lighting system. You can use the After Effects lights individually, and you can also use an environment map. I'm going to use a default environment map that might work for this Vegas setting we've got going here. So let's try this one, this kind of nighttime looking thing. We'll kind of crank the curves a little bit to give him some more of a street reflected light, something like that. Great. All right, that's just a starter on the look of this character. And now, since we've set everything up for the origin to be back here behind the bridge, as soon as that loads in, we should have this, our element monster standing right perfectly square to this ground that we set up earlier. I'm going to hide the ground for now and go ahead and play through just to show you what kind of setup we got. All right, starting at the very beginning, let's just do a little preview. Check it out. We've got our monster right here picking up something and throwing it, all nicely motion tracked into this scene. Gets a little wobbly at the end there, but not too bad. This is great, and the timing is actually pretty decent. It's about what we want it to be, and that was totally just a guess. So we're going to try to orient him a little bit more carefully for this comp. So let's go to our element effect here, and then under group 1, I'm going to say create a group null. You'll see this little null has been created right here. I'm going to rename that to the monster null. And now I can take this, rotate it around, and you'll see that based on the origin of this animation, I'm rotating his whole world. So if I want him to throw this cop car right at the window right around here, I can just grab this null object and kind of scale and place him to be wherever I want within this comp. Let's put him there, and let's scale him up. Let's start him off as a truly gargantuan object in the scene. So let's play this through and see what it looks like. And this is rendering pretty fast for our draft takes. Leans down, picks up a car, and throws it at the wall. The camera goes over just a second late to catch this. Goes by his foot, moving out of the way. Oh, that's kind of a cool effect. Look at this craziness. We're getting close. All right, I feel happy with this. I like this position. I like him leaning down right here and grabbing stuff. I think this is going to be great. So we're missing what he's supposed to be picking up and throwing. And for that, I'm going to turn to a simple resource, Sketchfab. Now, Sketchfab has become this really wonderful resource to me because they have a ton of stuff on there, and a lot of it is downloadable and usable to you right away just for a simple Creative Commons attribution. All right, so back in After Effects, I can click on my element layer, go to the scene setup again, and under here, I'm going to right-click and say New Group Folder. I'm going to assign this to be group number 2. Just like that. That'll be important for later. And right in here, I can import that model that we just downloaded. So let's see, we're under here, there, police car, police. All right, let's try loading this in. Looks like we got a little disconnected from the textures. No big deal. I'll go ahead and click on this. Let's load them up. All right, a simple diffuse texture and a simple normal bump texture. Let's load that in as well. Great. Let's see. Let's make this more reflective. A little bit more glossy and a little bit reflective. Ooh, not that much. Right around here. And just about this level, I think, will work for right now. This is going to be a very simple prop that we're going to use in here. So let's start off right here and just say OK. And just like before with this null that we created for the monster, I'm going to go into Element and say for group 2, I would also like a group null, please. So I'll create that. And now you see a nice second null appeared right here that I can call police car null. All right, now what's supposed to happen is he's going to come pick up this police car, which I'm going to scale to be the size of this other nearby police car or so, something like that. He's going to pick it up, I guess, by the rigging on the top of it or something like that. Pick it up and throw it at the wall like that. Now, to make this look a little bit better, I'm going to need to hand animate this guy. But right now his axis is right on the ground where he's contacting, and that's not going to be very helpful for me. So back in Element, I'm going to go to the Scene Setup again. And for this police car model, instead of its alignment being at the bottom, I'm going to switch that to being the model center. That's great. Now I can flip around and do all sorts of crazy things. I'm also going to add in one more group, with a guide for myself. We'll call this group 3, and right in here I'm going to create a plane. I'll make it a big plane. And on its material, you can go to an advanced setting down here. I've just clicked on the material right there, and then under advanced settings I can click on matte shadow. Now if I click on matte shadow, it disappears for me here. You can't see it, but it's going to become a compositing aid in just a moment. So I'll say OK, and now you can see my police car is here, and it's right in the middle of this ground plane that you can't really see. It's letting me know when I'm hitting the ground in here. Pretty cool. So the way to make this even more visible is under Elements Render Settings down here. If I go to the render settings, I can go to Ambient Occlusion and enable that. As soon as I do, if I crank up the values just a little bit, you can see some ambient occlusion that appears on the ground, both where the feet are contacting and where that police car is. So pretty neat. Still very simplistic rendering abilities, but it's a great place to start. So let's zoom out a little bit and let's take a look at what we've got here. So as I play through, you can be reminded that we've added in this monster. He's nicely matted behind this bridge, at least this thick part of it right here. He's bending down to grab this police car and is going to hurl it at the wall right here. The camera's going to have a little delayed pan over to show it exploding or something like that right here as the camera goes through. At real speed, this is pretty awesome. Here comes our guy. He's going to grab this police car and throw it over there. I love it. Now there's this moment where he grabs the car, and I'm going to add some keyframes to my police car here. There are better ways to do this, but we're going to go with a quick and dirty, simple position keyframe kind of animation thing with this. So let's reverse this police car. Let's say it was heading down, driving sort of toward him. And he's going to pick it up by the rigging right here somehow. So let's see, if it ended up here right when he picks it up, we'll add a position and rotation keyframe to the cop car right there. And then as we back up here, let's add him sliding along the ground back toward camera. I'm using the widgets specifically to move this back and forth. X and Z. Let's rotate this a little bit more to be in line with the footage. And let's have this cop car actually enter frame. That could be kind of cool. It looks like this is the sidewalk, so let's move it a little bit closer to us into one of these lanes and move it back on the Z-axis like that. Perfect. So now I think what will happen if I maybe ease this in. Let's see if this is exciting. Police car swings by, doesn't know what he's getting into, comes to a little bit of a screeching halt right there. Let's have the screeching halt be like this. We'll add a couple of keyframes here. So it's headed straight forward in line with itself, and then right at the end here it screeches to a halt and maybe even rotates a little bit on the Z. We're going for basic, real simple animation here, folks. Let's see. It's a monstrous scene. We've got a dynamic police car leading us right into frame. Ends up under here. The monster grabs it, even though it's trying to slow down in time. Maybe we'll stretch out these keyframes a little bit so that works like this. Monster's grabbing it, and then right here, we're going to have to do some real distinct keyframe animation. So let's switch to a different view by pressing F11. And now I have a confession to make. Obviously, it's really exciting to watch somebody animate something frame by frame over a long period of time, but we're going to Julia Childs this, and we're going to skip ahead to where I have already meticulously gone through, placed keyframes on this cop car all the way through the duration of this animation. Here it is at high speed for those of you who love to watch the making of keyframes. And once that's done, let's watch it in real time. This is Unit 19 responding to a giant monster on the Las Vegas Eyes, and they've made a terrible mistake. Ow. And now that you know I don't want to take up your time with the really boring parts, I'm going to talk over some exciting work that I did ahead of time as well. Now, Element responds to After Effects lights. So what I did is I jumped around the scene and sampled different colors of lights that I imagine exist, and positioned spotlights kind of all around the monster to be bouncing colors from the environment and the lights in the environment off of him. Like this one from the palm trees kind of behind and below him, maybe like pointed up into the air like that. You can also try to add a bit of a rim light, maybe coming from this Paris balloon back here. Just crank that way back in space, point it forward, and give him a bit of a rim. Sample this police car's glow color and kind of put it down under him. Just a few little interactive lights to make the final output a little bit more rich. All right, so we got lights going from a whole lot of directions, and if we play this back, it's going to take a second to catch up here, but check this out. Pretty cool looking. We'll play through a little bit more of this. And I'm noticing that right as this police car gets to right around here, I'm realizing how reflective this polished concrete surface is. And it's not really reflecting my police car at all. Obviously it doesn't have the lights on it, but it feels like it should be reflecting more. And Element does have a solve for this. So in Element, I'm going to go to the scene setup again, and then once it loads, we will go to our scene group 3, where we've got that plane. And on this plane model, I'm going to turn it into a reflective surface by saying reflect mode should be a mirror surface. And then on the material setting itself, I can adjust the amount of reflectivity. And down here in the advanced settings, say also matte, not just the shadows, but also matte reflections. There we go. Let's say OK. And now, down here in the concrete, it's a little bit subtle, but let me turn on group 3. Let me turn it on and off. And you'll be able to see, watch below the police car and below the monster. When I turn this on, you get both contact shadows and a little bit of reflectivity, which is great. And there we've got our monster kind of reflecting in the ground, our police car kind of reflecting in the ground. And that's kind of a cool effect. I like what's happening with that. All right, let's see. Here we go. Playing back. Love the motion. All right, we've got some good stuff going on here. All right, so we've got our CG monster and this police car working out pretty well. So now it's time to focus on the impact moment of the police car. I'm going to try to do this by utilizing one of those tracked solids we grabbed earlier, this one called Sign. Now I'm going to scroll down to it and copy its position and orientation. That'll be great because I can then simply kind of go cherry pick some of these awesome stock footage elements that I have from Action VFX, from Action Essentials, and just Production Crate, a handful of places over the years. I'll mix and match a handful of them, maybe some rock debris, some powder hits, and some falling smoke. I'll align them all with the moment that this impact is supposed to happen. I'll change them into 3D layers. I'll tell them to not accept lights. And then once I've done that, I can paste the position and rotation of that sign locator. And now if I quickly play through that, you see I've got a bunch of stock stuff kind of right where that impact is supposed to happen. We'll line everything up a little bit better here. Let's see. So the impact point seems to be a little bit over here off screen. So I'll just move that relative to where it was. We'll also try to adjust the anchor point of any of these stock elements. So if we decide to scale them later, they scale around the center of where things appear. I'll move that over to the same target point as well. That seems like it's working okay. Now this falling dust one, the action happens a little bit later, so I'm going to time stretch it to play a little bit faster. So that dust falls down just like that, right as the car falls as well. I'm also going to need to maybe mask off the top of it and just feather that out a bunch. I'll tone down its opacity too. All right, so with all these elements, again, just kind of adjusting the anchor point so I can place them in a nice spot. This one is some welding sealing stock footage. I'll change the blending mode of that to add so we can see some cool sparks flying off of this area when that impact happens. And then lastly, I'm going to drag in this awesome pre-keyed explosion. I think it'll work really well for this spot. Let's turn off its light acceptance. And we'll also paste those at that 3D location from the sign. And it's looking great. We're going to have to retime this a bit. So let's find the moment where that police car would hit the ground is right around here. Again, adjust the anchor point. Just drag it down like this. So if I were to scale this explosion, it'll scale about the proper spot here. All right, so somewhere around here should kind of give us the right landing point. I'll adjust the dust falling to kind of line right into where that explosion happens. And I'll take a quick preview at that. Boom. Hey, that's kind of fun. Boom, boom. Nice. Now, obviously that smoke is totally the wrong color at the moment. All of those dust things are absolutely the wrong look, but we're going to tweak all of those later. Right now, I want to focus on that sign behind it, because it would be kind of cool if something were to happen to that sign when they slam into it. And a quick Google search for NAB being canceled revealed this cool image with, canceled with 2 L's, the British spelling. And we'll drag that into its own comp. And I'm going to quickly turn this into a digital sign that's glitching out using a really simple effect. We will add in a black solid, drag it behind there, because I'm going to use one of the universe transition effects. So it's under Red Giant Transitions, the glitch transition. Perfect. Now in the glitch transition, I can set the B plate to be this black solid. And then right at the point when it's supposed to be hit, I can set a keyframe for 0 transition and then crank that all the way up. And look at this beautiful glitchiness happening. So watch that playing through. That's pretty cool. Excellent. And then to give this more of like an LED screen look, I'm going to add an adjustment layer on top of that. And I'm going to add CC ball action. Now ball action turns your image into a bunch of little balls, and if you want to use it like this, you can simply scale the ball down to a really small point where everything resembles an LED screen a little bit. Simple trick. I can't remember who I saw do that originally, but it's great. It makes this look like an LED screen. So let's try tweaking. Looks like you can't do a half value, so we'll just stick with this. Look at that. It looks great. That glitch transition is doing a lot of the work, and that ball action makes it look like an LED screen. Let's get this back into the comp. So drag in that pre-comp. We should still have our position and rotation of this area copied. So once I turn that to a 3D plane, I'll disable the lights, and we'll go ahead and paste the position and rotation to it. And look at that. It snaps right to that wall where the sign is going to be. I'll turn down its opacity so I can kind of scale and position it correctly. Now, one interesting thing about this wall is it's obviously kind of a curvy wall, and I don't really have time to break this plane into a bunch of curved things. So because this is just panned over to and then panned away from, I'm going to simply scale it into place so it's about in the right screen space. Let's find whatever frame shows the most of that screen. Yeah, right there. And, rotate it a bit into place. Right there. Works. And I'm going to use a Bezier warp effect instead of doing anything fancy to try to get this to work. So let's Bezier warp this guy. All right. Let's drag down that top curve, match the corners a bit and the edges. Drag some things together. And it looks like about the right shape, kind of curved inward a little bit. Next, let's apply a matte choker really quick, just feather out the edges a little bit like that. And then maybe some brightness and contrast. I'll just quickly bring up the black values of this to be a little bit more similar to the sign, to the existing sign there. Something like that. All right, let's see what this looks like in place as we're tracked through. Oh, I should turn on the motion blur. All right, simplify this and let's take a quick look at how all of these things are combining together now. Now I realize as I scroll backward through this footage, I actually run into some issues with the with that sign being visible in front of that foreground bridge stuff because I didn't really track that stuff. So I'm going to go with the cheapest solution to that, which is this sign is always changing in the background, right? So how about maybe that NAB canceled thing comes up like here, where there's no obscuration. I'll just set some keyframes for having that pop on right here, 100% there, and back that up to 0 right here. It'll just look like the sign's cycling through stuff anyway right before the monster hits it. Works for me. Cheap way to not draw a matte. All right, let's move on. So all of this stuff is supposed to be falling behind this fence locator that we created earlier. So I'll set that to semi-transparent for a second so I can see myself drawing some quick masks. And we'll add a few keyframes here to the where the matte is. We'll feather it out a bit. Some keyframes. Oh, stretch it out a little bit. We'll make sure it covers this whole foreground area where that police car would have fallen behind, but also we'll make sure it doesn't get in front of that monster's foot there. And now that I'm pretty confident about this shape, one of the great things about having a pre-existing pre-collapsed 3D matte, which I have up earlier, that little foreground element, is that I can turn this up to 100%, just copy this whole thing, dive into that pre-comp that we'd made with the other mask for the bridge, and paste it in here. And if I do that, look at that. That fence is matted out. Not from this layer right here. Let me turn that off. It's actually happening because of that pre-comp that we had earlier. So making use of something that we'd done before. So now the monster throws the police car. It hits that sign, which glitches out. There's this great, poorly color-corrected explosion in the foreground. But it's all tracking nicely. It's all in the right spots that I want everything to be. See that at speed? Kaboom. Lovely. All right, so there's one last detail that seems really obvious that I've missed this whole time, which is having these police lights do something. I mean, it comes right through the foreground, and it feels like those lights should be active. Now, we're very short on time, but we're going to see if we can really quickly add in something to make this a little bit better. So I'm going to start with a point light. I'll go ahead and color it bluish. We'll say OK. And then this point light, I'm going to move right next to the police car null, attach it to it like that, and then zero out the position. Now, zeroing out the position should bring it right to the center of the cop car like that, which is exactly what I need. Pressing F11, I can switch to this custom view and kind of move over and take a look at this police car and where that light ended up. And then using my gizmos, my favorite way to translate an object, I will quickly position these lights, or this light rather, to be right here in front of this part of the police car. You'll see it's even casting some light down here onto the police car. That's pretty cool. We'll put that one right there. And then since we've got this one, we can duplicate that layer and drag one over here using the gizmos. Whoops. right to the other kind of light spot there. Great. So now I've got these nice parented lights that are going to stick right to the police car. But they're not visible lights. Like putting in a light in After Effects isn't visible. But a really cool trick of Null Light Factory, something I hope you're familiar with. I'll add an instance of Null Light Factory to an additive black solid. And then I can check this little checkbox here that says Use Lights. Now I've got a light visible on every light source in here. Now I don't need it on everything, so right here in the naming conventions, I can change light to be the word point, and now lens flares will only appear on my point lights, which is exactly what we need for this scene. I'll go ahead and add some keyframes to the brightness and scale of these flares, and so they kind of like, they shrink down as that police car goes into the distance. Let's say like, scale them down. We've got that other flare reference in the background. Great, something like that. Now right now these two lights are acting as actual point lights to my element layers. I don't want them to be as bright as they are right now, like that monster is pretty bright blue, so I'm going to turn down their intensity just a little bit. And so there's a little bit of blue on the monster, but not as much as there was before. Luckily, it doesn't affect my null flares, which I can leave there nicely. And speaking of the null flares, I'm going to want them to be a little bit more police light colored. So we could start out by adding some keyframes to the colors of these lights. Like let's turn them more blue to begin with. And then maybe I'll turn this other one. Let's see, why isn't this? Oh, I forgot a checkbox. Color from lights. There we go. There we go. Now these flares should be tinted by the color of their source light, which is perfect. So I'll set a keyframe for blue, wait a moment later, keyframe that over to red, go forward again, keyframe that down to blue again. Let's copy and paste that over. And let's evenly space these sort of. Something like that. And I'll drag these keyframes to the front here, and then I'm going to add a loop out expression from the selector, just like that. I'm going to copy this whole thing, the whole loop expression and light things to my other point light as well. And then I'm going to offset them by one keyframe length, basically, so they'll be alternating between blue and red the whole time. So a quick preview of that shows me that cool. We've got lights kind of cycling back and forth between blue and red as they go down the road there. I could mess with those with a little more time, but we're very short on it now, so I'm going to skip ahead to my next thing. All right, so I've made a duplicate copy of this comp where I've pre-comped a few things together, like all of the dust elements from that impact moment and the like. And let me show you, if I hide all of the nulls and kind of useless layers at this point, I'm left with just these 7 layers that construct our final image, which is pretty cool. Now, obviously on frames like this, you can see that they're not really composited all that well together. We've got this weird explosion here, and then it kind of turns into this bizarre colored smoke here. None of that looks very great in this comp. But even though we're short on time, we are in luck because Red Giant has this really awesome tool that's one of my favorite recent plugins that we've made. It's called Super Comp. And if I select these remaining layers that construct this final image, I can simply add this effect to all of them, Red Giant Super Comp. And when I do, what I get is this neat little interface that is basically all of my active layers brought into this compositing environment that allows me to quickly bring up any of my standard compositing tricks that I might do to a layer. For example, on this monster layer, I would love to have some of this light wrapping around him. And by clicking here, I get this cool radial menu of things like edge blends, edge erodes, haze, volume fog, all these types of things that I might want to add to something that I can add super quickly. So, for example, let's add a little bit of light wrap so this sign is glowing onto the color of the monster. And maybe I'm going to erode his edges a little bit. Some of them look a little bit dark there, and I can maybe erode them a little bit together. Or I could add some general haze that kind of helps blend him into the lighting from the scene. And one of the other cool tricks, which is really helpful for people who are colorblind like me, is I can go to a shot like this, and add some color correction right to my layer. It's this mini version of Colorista, which is my favorite color correction tool. Very helpful for colorblind people. But now even more helpful because they have this cool tool called Match Background, which is going to take the alpha of my layer and look at what the black and white values are kind of contained within that area of the comp. And if I press Match Background, it's going to tint and move his colors toward colors that are available within that space. So his black levels match, which is pretty black here, but in other scenes, this is really a dramatic thing that you can do. So I'm matching his colors a little bit more, blending his edges, letting some of the light from the environment wrap onto him, which is fantastic. And then I can quickly go through my different layers and do different levels of compositing tricks to them too. Now let's take a moment to look at this explosion that happens. Now it's the thing that is kind of coming in the worst. It's got this kind of bright yellowy explosion part right here, and then a little bit later it becomes this dark smoke that isn't really matching anything at all. So the way I'm going to handle this is by treating the explosion like two different types of effects. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my explosion layer, which will automatically add this unused layer up here to Super Comp, which I can simply add in by pressing the little plus icon right there. I'll drag him right down to be next to his counterpart. And this first half, I want to be an additive effect. I want it to brighten the scene a little bit, but not just a simple add. I'd like to use one of SuperComp's presets, and there are a ton of these, including ones for pyrotechnics, like a big fire, which glows and wraps around layers, even ones that are actually composited in front of it. That's the beauty of SuperComp. Every layer within this interface is aware of each other. So I can wrap glows in front of foreground objects, which is a lovely thing to do without having to pre-comp everything together. So I love this effect for the explosion right here. I might tone down some of the heat blur that's happening a little bit, but I still like the general effect, and maybe I'll turn down this core matte, which is preserving these inner colors a little bit. So let's soften that, turn its density down a little bit. So now it's this big explosion, which kind of covers up that stuff. And then on this layer itself, if I click on it, I can add keyframes to any of these properties, like have the opacity of this explosion just kind of fade out down to 0, letting the smoke take over. Now this smoke here on the second layer could use a lot more integration. I'm going to start out by adding some color correction and having it match this background a little bit more. And look at that, already the automatic tool makes it a much more appealing smoke color. Then I'm going to add some light wrap. Now the light wrap comes in at an appropriate subtle amount that you would want for most comps, but since this is smoke, I could take this amount and really dial it up. And look at this. Now I have light from the stuff behind really affecting this smoke. I can even maybe make the size a little bit bigger. So the lights from behind are wrapping all around the smoke. And automatically, look at the difference between the way the smoke was looking before without SuperComp and now with SuperComp. This whole thing just looks better to me. I can go through and do the same types of things, adding presets to like this impact moment. I'm going to maybe make it an additive layer as well, so it kind of picks up some of this light. And I'll use a preset like maybe we'll use an explosion core preset. And then last we've got this sign, which should actually be behind this monster. And it needs a little bit of glow. So I can quickly just press here and add my favorite new glow, Red Giant's Optical Glow, to it. All right, let's turn the fall off up a bit on that glow and maybe bring its amount down to like here. That still looks like a nice glowing sign, kind of consistent with these other ones a bit, maybe a little bit less. And let me just quickly play for you back to back. Here is this whole composite without using SuperComp. The bad explosion, all that stuff. And now let me play it back to you using SuperComp, using our 5 minutes worth of SuperComp. And the advantage is really clear to me. I like being able to mix and match my elements together with all the layers aware of each other. It's just a really cool way to put something together. Red Giant has some really great walkthroughs of SuperComp available on redgiant.com. Specifically, Stu Maschwitz does an amazing walkthrough and also talks a little bit about his inspiration for coming up with this plugin. So to recap, if you've got any fun trackable footage and you've got a few hours to kill, it could be really fun to try to bring them to life using this combination of amazing tools and features that are out there. We've got Mixamo, Cinema 4D, working nicely with Element within After Effects, and then marrying them all together with SuperComp in this really great and fast way to put something exciting together today. I hope you guys enjoyed it.